Hello and welcome to the first of hopefully many video podcasts from Venn Digital. My name is Brian Whigham, the founder and chief exec of Venn, who really are known for designing, building and optimizing recruitment marketing websites. We've had a 12-year history designing and building to the best of our ability. Some stunning websites over the years, high-performing websites that drive results for our clients. And a lot of the inspiration that we've taken over this time has been from out with the recruitment marketing sector. And within that, we've learned a lot from our time spent in e-commerce. And this podcast really is designed to bring some perspective from other industries. So joining me today on our first ever podcast is the co-founder of one of the fastest growing beer brands in the UK, Alan Mahon, who joins us today. So Alan, I'd like to introduce you to the crowd. If you could tell us a little bit who you are, what you do and why it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Alan Mahon. I'm the founder of Brewgooder. I think that my job's quite a cool one. I get to wake up, go into work, make some beer, sell it, and hopefully use that beer to empower communities at home and abroad through various different projects through the funds of our charity, the Brewgooder Foundation.
Nobody wakes up, despite them wanting to, nobody wakes up and thinks, right, I'm going to start brewing my own. Well, maybe you did after a good night out. So what led you to this point, Alan? Don't be so humble. Tell us about the backstory that got you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I guess it probably starts actually roughly about 10 years ago. When I was 22, I had went to university in Glasgow and absolutely loved my 4 years drinking lots of beer in the student union, going to lots of gigs, really enjoyed my course. But I kind of got to the end of it and I thought, actually, I need something on my CV or no one will hire me. I guess a lot of the people listening can probably imagine the conundrum I was in. And I decided to do, I guess what I was always sort of brought up to do is if you kind of have talents that you kind of use them, for other people. So I did some volunteering work. Most notably in Nepal. I went traveling in Nepal for 3 months, and whilst I was there, I ended up getting sick from an unsafe water source. So I got a parasite, and I kind of that moment kind of stuck with me. I came home, things weren't working well, and I was losing lots of weight, and loads of stuff that's probably a bit R-rated for a podcast was happening. But I got a really common prescription. And I think, there must be a handful of people who are listening to it who've probably taken metronidazole. It's like a really common antibiotic. And within a week, I was back to, I was brand new, as you say, in Scotland. And that kind of stuck with me. I thought that there was something weird in the fact that I was born on the 30th of April, 1990, and there were probably, hundreds of kids who were also born then and they never made it past their 5th birthday. So I thought that this was probably like a calling, like a vocational thing for me, that I would go and try and get into international development and get into water. So I spent a year, from 22 to 23, just kind of applying for each and every job in that sector that I could find on Indeed or, on Google or through the different grad schemes and stuff. And I got rejected from every single one of them. Some were quick rejections. Some of them were pretty slow rejections. In the case of the Department for International Development, I spent a year going through that grad scheme, only to be told at the end that I probably failed one of the psychometric tests, which I don't know what they tell you about anybody's abilities. But when I did eventually get a job, it was for a sandwich company. And I know that sounds kind of like a weird segue, but it's kind of really important. It was a sort of cafe called Social Bite in Edinburgh, and what it did was it allowed people at a very rough time in their life, maybe they'd experienced homelessness or they were vulnerable or they just needed some extra food or coffee, to go and take coffee or food that had been donated by somebody else. So it was like suspended service, and that kind of job really opened my eyes to the fact that you could build a brand or you could build a business that had kind of a purpose in it. And I worked on that project for probably about 6 years in all. We did, going from suspended food and coffee right through to building villages for homeless and vulnerable people. in Edinburgh. Like, it was such a ridiculous journey. And all through that, I kind of went from poor student to poor graduate, but I got a bit more disposable income. And it allowed me to buy some things that I liked. Coffee was the big one. I'm still addicted to coffee, unfortunately, probably more so than when I was younger. And then beer. Like, I went from drinking £1 pints in the beer bar in Glasgow to drinking £7 cans of Cloudwater or whatever it was. And for me, there was this big social milieu, if you like, of people who really, part of the night out was talking about the beer that you were drinking and who it was by and what it tasted like. And for me, I just kind of thought, wow, there's such power in this industry. Like, at this moment in time, this is about 2015, 2016. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if the learning that I took from I guess the personal experience I had from unsafe water all the way through to, doing this homelessness venture, if you like, social enterprise with Social Bite, if I could combine that in a beer brand, wouldn't that be an amazing thing to get up and do for the next 4 years? And I think we had a few names for it and a few ideas for it that were pretty terrible and probably wouldn't bear talking about. But when I kind of thought the idea of Brewgooder, I thought it's such a good pun that you can't really let it go. So you may as well just like dedicate your life to it. I didn't quite know how to brew beer as much as I knew how to drink it. So our first sort of production run, if you like, was me brewing it in a bathtub and 300 of the 1,000 bottles exploding, and the other 700 tasting a bit like shit. So, you can imagine my surprise as to how hard it would be to brew good beer. So we decided to, I guess, work with other people to contract brew, to develop recipes, to implement them, to effectively use the expertise of other people. And I think that collaborative business model kind of stays with us today. We work with 3 or 4 different partners across the UK to brew, our beer, but with their expertise and their help. And then it gets distributed, all across the UK in different bars, restaurants, and supermarkets and convenience stores. And I guess we set out with a mission very early on. It was quite focused on bringing 1 million people clean drinking water. And that, I don't think it's changed. How we elaborate that, how we explain that, how we go about that has actually pretty radically transformed within the past 6 years. We got all the way through to the point of really being as collaborative as possible and trying to work with 254 breweries during a single weekend to raise funds for the projects that we were supporting, up until the point where it was literally on the day of the COVID lockdowns and it got shut down again. And that kind of started a second life for Brewgooder. So there's lots in there to unpack, to untangle, and I don't want to kind of go through my whole story without sort of drawing down on the points that you want to talk about. But I guess the headlines are that, we're one of the fastest growing craft beer brands in the UK. I think what's sort of special about that is that we're doing it, in really challenging market conditions. I think the past 2 years of COVID and post-COVID have actually really shifted the market in our favour. We've always been doing this since day one. We've been trying to empower people through beer, but now people are starting to realise that that's legitimate and authentic and actually what people want. We've probably impacted the lives of about 160,000 people in bigger or lesser ways, from water provision in developing countries all the way through to our most recent big product launch was to unlock food bank item donations in the UK. And we developed that concept about 18 months ago. And we're looking for the best opportunity to do it. And we ended up launching it with a brand called Twisted in Co-op nationally. And we didn't have a clue about how important that actually would be by the time it hit the shelves, and how much of an issue cost of living would be. And now we've got a team of, I'm looking out onto 14 people here, when a year and a half ago it was just myself and my co-founder James. So there's a lot's happened, and it's always quite weird to take it all in.
No, it's why I wanted to launch the podcast with this dynamic. I think the recruitment industry only knows what it knows, like a lot of industries. The booze industry, again, I've worked extensively in that sector as well, and they only know what they know. So to kind of cross-pollinate some of the insights and learnings and the takeaways. And one thing I wanted to draw on was, look, recruitment's an overcrowded market. The barrier to entry in recruitment is very low. There's no shortage of recruitment agencies in the UK driving their position in the market. Therefore, it's very difficult to stand out. it's probably not too dissimilar to the craft beer market. It's probably not too different to the gin market. Again, we used to have one gin. Now we've got 1,700 different gins. Every corner of Cheshire and every street in Manchester has its own gin nowadays.
Yeah.
So I think that how do you make your brand stand out? How do you create a point of difference? And your strapline attached to that is brewed on purpose. So what advice would you give to a business owner to ensure that their brand stands out and has a purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I think I couldn't have in good conscience got out of bed in 2016 and said there's not enough good beer in the world. Like arguably we're coming down with good beer and great brewers, pushing the boundaries of innovation each time. But for me, there was something in beer that was so inherently social. If you even think of the basic, I guess, like gesture of buying somebody a pint, I can imagine in the 30s, 40s, 60s, 70s when it wasn't too easy for guys in particular to talk about their feelings, that was kind of like a bit of a I love you man type thing. You bought someone a pint, there was reciprocity, they bought you one back. And if you think about beer as an industry, it's that inherent socialness means that there's a social power that's kind of in it. And I think that regardless of the amount of breweries that I had seen, nobody, for me, had tapped into what was possible through beer versus building a brand because they liked it, right? And I'm not saying that that's not a credible thing to do. In fact, it's what propels most of our industry forward. But why I think we've managed or are managing to get the sort of cut through or attention or share of voice that we do versus our size and versus our capitalization, if you like, versus our bigger competitors, is that we genuinely believe it, right? Like, I don't want to, like, it sounds immodest to say I think we have an authenticity that other people, lack, but I do think that. I mean, in our industry right now, sustainability is like a buzzword that everyone is now attaching to, which is amazing because there will be some really, really positive environmental and social, areas that get touched and positively impacted because of that. But my fear is in 3 years' time, when that's not on the agenda of the marketing teams, that it just gets sort of jettisoned. And when that happens, hopefully Brewgooder will be of a size that we continue to do what we do from a people empowerment point of view, from an environmental point of view, but actually to a much greater extent because we'll never really leave it. Like, I think the difference between us and the difference between lots of other different beer brands, and I'm not saying that they're doing it in a bad way. I mean, I applaud all of it, but it's their CSR, it's not their DNA. And I think we are, purpose is in our DNA. And I think that when you start to understand your industry almost from a different philosophical lens, you start to kind of think, well, if the whole point of this is to make it as accessible to people as possible, it determines what type of beer you make, how you communicate it, how you let others in. If you were to imagine a different lens on an industry like recruitment, I mean, you're in the ultimate people industry, right? If you're looking to fill vacancies, that's one thing. But if you're looking to help somebody get the job that they've always wanted to get, to afford to get a job that they've, can afford to upgrade their family from, a small flat to a house with a garden so their kids can play. Like, there's stories and there's motivation and there's power in just understanding what you do is more than just what you do.
Brilliant. And I think it's on that. Before I forget, how did you define that audience? Because I think something that we do our best with our recruitment clients is to try and help them understand the persona audiences they're going after. They say they want more clients, they say they want more candidates, but let's break that down. So it's probably no different to the beer industry. There's no shortage of labels. We want Gen Z, we want Gen this, that. We want old, we want young, we want male, we want female, we want affluent, there's all these studies and data research, especially in e-commerce, where you can really pay businesses to lock in that is your ideal John Smith who drives a Mercedes C-Class, who does, it's nuts. How did you define who the target audience was for Brewgooder and how much has that followed through to be true?
Yeah, like one of the things I'll definitely say is like, do not put too much credit on my ability to foreplan. I just fell in love with the idea that this could happen, and I just basically put it out there and see who would bite. So I definitely didn't sit, and I probably spent 3 years of my life banging my head against the wall, if not more, by not having sat down and thought of it. It was much more entrepreneurial in the sense of, right, this is an amazing idea, and if I love it so much, everyone else will love it, and I'll just put it out there and it will work. But yeah, I think what we understand now as a Brewgooder drinker is definitely what we had titled, I guess, purposeful progressives, like people who were much more of a psychographic, if you like, than a demographic. And it sounds a bit wanky to say that, but like people who believed that the world was redeemable, that were optimistic, that could find joy, could identify with brands or activities or things that express certain values about them. And that, tends towards this late millennial Gen Z audience. But the irony is that at the same time that's, the people that you're talking to, the Patagonia wearers, the sort of wannabe Tesla drivers, these people, actually the ability for beer brands to penetrate them is actually getting harder. They're choosing healthier lifestyles. They're choosing to drink less, but they're choosing to spend more when they do drink. So if you like, there's a lag between those being the most amount of our customers. Like, regardless of what it looks like in 2030, right now, most of our drinkers will be, 30 to 40, actually, probably, just based on, where they get their beer, how they get their beer, but with, closely followed with that sort of 25 to 30 sort of bracket. So there's definitely ways to cut it, but ultimately when you see your ideal profile versus your actual drinker, there's definitely going to be discrepancies no matter what. But it kind of amazes me that actually I think the psychographic of those purposeful progressive people is actually very, very wide. In fact, it's actually a great thing. The fact that we can't say that they drive a Mercedes A-Class and they, work in accountancy or whatever is actually really, really good. It's just like, is there a certain amount of people that really actually want to seek the positives through doing what they do every day or every week or every month, which is have a beer? And I think that that's actually quite an encouraging thing.
It's, again, a lot of the brands that I follow now, we're under a lot of pressure as business owners. We've got to be inspirational leaders on a mission to heal the planet sometimes, no matter what you're doing, if it's brewing beer or making websites or CRM or leggings at Gymshark. There's always a kind of wider purpose that we're working towards. And maybe that's the right answer. Attracting talent, again, another thing we've been focused on right now is establishing a brand for the customers and making sure customers buy into and want to use and come back to. I want to come back to that question. How do you ensure that your target audience comes back time and time again? There's one thing delighting them with the product, but is there anything in content marketing from your experience? What do people tend to engage with? Is it purely price, promo and offers, or is it this wider social conscious that you're involved with? Let me come back to that question. The question I've got now is the target audience. Following that on is to your employer brand. Do you feel that by having a very clear narrative around this is our purpose, this is our mission, if you don't buy into that mission and you simply want to work for a beer business, maybe don't work for us, are you that distinctive in the type of people you attract and retain or let go within your business?
Yeah, I'll come back to that last bit quite pointedly, because I really do think there's interesting lessons for business leaders and entrepreneurs to learn from that conundrum. What if you just want to work here, right? But I think we've been super lucky. I mean, if you look at our, initially our senior leadership team, so less than 18 months ago, it was just myself and James, right? So we had a few people who were working for us pre-COVID. They left for other places, and it was just me and him doing pretty much everything quite terribly and not focusing on the good things. But we started to engage, a senior team and support team that had come from the beer industry and were super talented and probably wouldn't have taken the risk to join such a small company at the time with the instability. Many of these people joined as there were still COVID restrictions in some form or another, kicking around the business. And I definitely think that the notion of what Brewgooder stood for within the industry, and these are people with 10, 20, 30 years sometimes under their belt in the biggest companies, the Heinekens, Carlsbergs, Kingfishers, they joined for what we stood for. But, ultimately they quite enjoyed selling beer as well. And then more recently, as we've kind of got the sort of specialist and support elements of our team, they've left careers either in spirits or in other beer companies or, other huge blue chip companies where the career path for them is really quite straightforward. And they've joined us for whatever reason. Is it a blend of it's cool industry, it's a cool looking product, it's a great tasting product, or actually what you do at the end of the day, translates into some cool things that you can kind of leave a legacy with. But ultimately, I think to your point around, if all you want to do is just sell beer or work a 9 to 5, go somewhere else. I think one of the dangers that I kind of see from the mentality of entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs are kind of like the new rock stars now, right? They're the sort of like, they've got this charisma and everyone looks up to them and thinks they're gurus. And, that can be built up to the point where when there's a chink in that armor, it becomes very evident that that's actually, quite a challenge for that business, let alone that person. I was at a sort of entrepreneurs sort of round table recently, and someone basically said, if you don't buy into the dream, my dream of what this company is, then, get out, basically. And I thought that was such a weird, totalitarian mindset where everyone has to, work for this thing that is just in your head. If someone came to me and said, like, listen, I really like your company, but at the end of the day, I want something that gives me 9 to 5, the flexibility to work in the office and work from home, but I'll do a really good shift and you'll never have to ask me where this piece of work is. That's great. Like, people have different desires and different opportunities to fulfill themselves outside of your company, right? And I really do think that the world has changed quite a bit in the past 2 or 3 years, and we're probably going to face lots and lots of changes, but there is something just around professionalism, job well done. And if you can inspire people to go that extra bit and motivate them or attract them into the company because of what you do, then happy days. But we also have to realize that people who work for us are also people, and what we care about as entrepreneurs and business leaders might overlap sometimes, but it doesn't have to become their obsession, because I think that's quite an unhealthy way to run teams. Probably a controversial opinion, but definitely one I hold.
Oh, look, I think it's all valid. I think there's a new generation of entrepreneur coming through, right? There's some very successful people with some very successful, rigid values that may not be reflective of the post-pandemic era. And even they're kind of staring into a headwind, wondering what to do next. And again, that's the kind of the theme of today. It's deciding, look, what is your brand? What is your brand strategy? And maybe the separation between branding versus brand. What is your employer brand? What is your corporate brand? And that's slightly different from the look and feel of your branding. And people do tend to not know the difference. Again, just recircling back to this new generation of rock star entrepreneur, which I like, because I'm going to put myself in that bracket until you get found out and you realise you're winging it. And again, I think that's part of the reason for this podcast. We want to help marketeers, we want to help marketing directors, but we also want to help inspire the chief execs, the founders, the MDs, because it's lonely. It's the loneliest job in the world. You're in your head all the time. You don't have all the answers, and you go looking for that inspiration. And I'm hoping this podcast can bring some of that inspiration, because I'm determined not to go fishing within the recruitment industry for answers. Let's go to e-commerce, let's go to fast fashion, let's go to booze and try and learn what is it you guys do that just lands so well, because we as consumers, we engage with your brands all the time. Coming back to that, can the two, I guess my question is, can the two things coexist? There's the branding of the product, but the perception, the cool can, the branding, the image, the look and feel, and the great taste. But then there's a kind of employer brand. Is that a conscious decision at Brewgooder to try and be completely transparent that what you see on the can and what you hear in terms of the story is the real ethos and culture of the business, right the way through to the type of people we welcome into our team? It's consistent. The two cannot be separated.
Yeah, I mean, on a deep level, if you looked at the stats and insights, you probably would find that. I mean, we try to, especially within our industry, there's a stereotype, if you like, which is probably much more pronounced in craft beer, where you have to have the sort of sleeve tattoo and the beard and the cap on backwards and the sort of anti-establishment type, whether it's, punkish or just
Are you
sort of
referring
dropout.
to James at Brewdog by any chance?
No. I think
He's
if
got no sleeve
you,
tattoos right enough. He's got the cap on backwards, but
yeah, well, sorry, I'm not specifically talking about any one person, but there's that sort of like you're outside of the mainstream of folk, and but that can also be the apathetic sort of I guess sort of dropout style stuff, and that's what that has been the archetype where I kind of feel like I'm not like that, right? I'm not. I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder that I don't think I fit into the industry particularly well. I'm some sort of like social, heart on his sleeve guy who is naive and doesn't really know what he's doing up against these people who almost speak a language, who look a certain way or whatever. And that's me. Like I have those things, right? I have the beard. I have the sort of middle class white guy, university educated, bit of money to buy a £7 pint of beer. So imagine anybody who doesn't look like me coming into our industry. I think it would be quite challenging. And I think what we've tried to do is to, I guess, try and be as open as possible to the fact that there's differences and be as transparent about that as possible. So I think a couple of years ago, maybe June, July time, we tried to develop a program called Work in Progress, which allowed us to effectively say, we're not actually that good at the inclusion side of things. Here's 14, 15 points that we could just implement right away that would make us better. And that was something that James and I started when it was just James and I. So you can imagine, the extent we had to go to become a better, more inclusive or diverse place to work. But that's now headed up by one of our people who, on paper would be as radically different in gender and, ethnicity and age to someone like me. But then it's about trusting those people to also realize that they're probably here for the same reasons you are, to effectively, run that program for you. So there's an element of transparency, there's an element of trust, but I think trust and transparency only make sense if you're prepared to admit that you're wrong or that you've done stuff badly. And I think that it takes a certain vulnerability or comfortableness with vulnerability to kind of admit that. And I don't think that that's necessarily stuff that people are conditioned to be comfortable with. And it could be quite difficult for someone, particularly who's leading an organization, to admit that they're wrong. And I can understand the pressures not to admit that. Does that make sense?
Completely agree with you. And I think you've teed up my next final few questions beautifully. Personal brand versus corporate brand, they're completely linked. When you're the founder, you are the brand. Again, I think in recruitment especially, there's a constant banging of the drum that it's all about the recruiter. It's all about the vacancy. And as long as that recruiter can build a personal brand on LinkedIn, naturally, they've got the following, they've got the connections, they can hustle, find the vacancy, place the candidate, because it's all about their personal brand. And I actually disagree with that. I want to start to challenge that ethos that by simply giving complete control to the recruiter, what's the point in working for a company? They might as well all be freelancers. So it's on the founder of the organization to give a purpose. Like the benefit of being part of our organization is the following things. And therefore to the client, so me, if I am hiring developers, designers, project managers, I've got to buy the brand, not the recruiter, because the recruiter is just an employee that can come and go. But there's very few brands out there in the recruitment sector that I would trust consistently to go back to time and time again. It's a bit like beer. Like beer recruiters, they can come and go. I can try different ones all the time. So loyalty to the brand. So I guess my question, teeing it up, the separation or the importance of having your personal brand, Alan, Brian, the founders, versus the company brand. Which one do you think comes first?
I mean, it's a good question. I think 40 years ago, I think what I felt. Let me just take a quick segue before answering that more fully. Like you know, the Michael Keaton film about the McDonald's founder. I think it's called The Founder. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And that was interesting because the whole joke, I guess, of the title is that he isn't the founder. He's the person who makes McDonald's, but he isn't the guy who you know, he isn't the McDonald brothers, right? But the notion, I guess, I wonder at what point the founder became visible to, you know, rather than industrialist, you know, Andrew Carnegie or Rockefeller or whatever. I wonder at what point the founder became so intrinsic, like the Steve Jobs archetype, right? And in many ways, in the modern world with the media that we have, it's pretty difficult to separate them in terms of, well, I know that person started that company, therefore what they say and what that company does have to be really highly aligned. But I think that's challenging, and I think there's mental health pressures that really, really, really are at play there as well in the long term, because people are completely identified if you start a business with your business and if your business is successful or not, and whether, you know, where you sit within the sort of rank of founders. And I listened to a guy who's quite controversial podcast. Hopefully you're not as controversial as him, but a guy called Sam Harris. And he talks about an episode where he said, basically, you know, at what point does a billionaire or a millionaire become a millionaire and start saying, I'm better than the 100,000 people, but I'm not as good as the 10 million. And when I get there, you know, there's this ever sliding ladder where, you know, does a founder of a business have to be Elon Musk to be successful or credible? And does that start to bleed into their personal life? And is their personal life dominated by who they are, you know, on LinkedIn in essence, and how their business is doing? And I think that's really unhealthy. And I really think that, like, sometimes I am not as polished as I would probably appear in LinkedIn in my personal life. But I'm not that I do anything particularly bad, but like, I get angry sometimes. I'm foul mouthed, you know, whenever I'm not, you know, on camera, I guess. Like, you know, I swear, of course, I drink too much.
It's a safe place. You can swear. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
Nobody's listening, so you can do what you want.
So I guess, like, for me, the question is, can they be separated? I don't think so. I don't think the conditions allow for them to be separated. I think we need to understand that people can't always be on camera. Let's just put it that way. Like, they can't always be perfect, and people make mistakes, and they're human. And businesses make mistakes, and we have to try and allow people who run companies, you know, it's very easy when they do something wrong for them to be literally get death threats. Like, I mean, I've seen that on a number of occasions where people have been, their businesses have been threatened to be burnt down, you know, all this sort of stuff for being, you know, potentially a bad business leader. You know, it's not great, but it's also not a capital crime, right? And I think we need to give people the opportunities, if they do lead businesses and they maybe do things wrong, to you know, the chance to make amends for their mistakes. But also, sorry. No.
I think I was trying to make, again, the purpose of today's podcast is to try and help educate marketeers, founders, that there is purpose in their brand, you know. And I kind of want to conclude on this point that, look, you're building, establishing a brand with purpose. It's why we chose Brewgooder to open this series, that you're building a brand with purpose. So there's phenomenal founders behind a lot of brands. You look at, nobody knows who the founder of Heineken is. Nobody knows who the founder of, you know, Budweiser is. Nobody knows whoever it goes on. It's no different to some of the best recruitment businesses in the UK and internationally. Nobody knows who the founder is, but yet they should be building a brilliant corporate brand, employer brand with purpose. You know, they built these brands on purpose to do good, maybe have some social impact, to return profits to shareholders and to grow the company and to create employment, to create wealth and create a better economy around them. So I do agree with you. I think sometimes the pressure set by new innovators like James at Brewdog, he's put himself front and centre, right in the crosshairs of the media and his employees, and he's built a phenomenal, albeit controversial, personal brand. You can't knock the guy for him moving the dial for the craft beer industry. So I guess the pressure on founders is, how much time should they give back to their personal brand in terms of building their employer brand? Come and work for me, be part of my mission, and that the corporate brand. And I do think that the two things can coexist. You look at some brilliant beer and recruitment brands, and that they don't have to have a maverick at the front of the ship, like you say, with Elon or Steve Jobs or James at Brewdog. They can still be brilliant businesses with great brands through the content and communication they share.
Yeah, definitely. And I think whatever, you touched on it, like the purpose. Yeah, like listen, our purpose is very expressly to sell money, to generate funds, to make impact happen. But some people's, I don't want to say that unless you do that, you don't have purpose in your business. I don't believe that at all. You can make, customers happy. You can, have a business where everyone feels at home and themselves is just as good a purpose as anything. But I think when your personal purpose aligns with your business's purpose, which unlocks some of other people's purpose, then that's a really heavy mixture that can be like rocket fuel for any business or any brand. And I think that just taking a step back to drill down the levels of what it is that you're actually doing and how it is that you're helping, even if it's in a small way, whenever you find that, it's kind of like a North Star that keeps you seeing on the really bad days and actually kind of makes the good ones hopefully even sweeter.
Brilliant. Alan, you've been an absolute rock star. Thank you for the time. I think some of the insights you've given and shared hopefully will resonate with some of the marketing teams that we talk to and some of the founders we hope to engage with. But today was just designed to inspire people about your story, how far you guys have come. Absolutely one to watch. I'd love to say there's a promo code. I don't think we're that organised, but for everybody listening, go to Brewgooder and buy their beer. It tastes brilliant and it's serving a much greater purpose beyond you having a good time. But it's a brilliant product. It's been a brilliant interview. I've really enjoyed the time and thank you for taking the time to talk to me personally and the team at Venn.
Nice one. I'll create Venn 20 for 20% off. There you go.
Venn, there you go. Hey, they go Venn with two N's, VENN, Venn 20 for 20% off. And I'll immediately send my marketing team to the website to buy. Alan, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And we'll speak to you soon.
Awesome. Take care.
Thanks, Alan. Bye-bye.